Hello. Can you guys hear me? I mean, the two other people that aren't me. And we're back. Sweet. By the next stream, which I'm thinking is Thursday. And I know that Thursday is Thanksgiving and everybody's spending time with their families, and that's cool and stuff. But thing one, I have no plans, which is fine. I'm not worried about that. But thing two, like by the time Thanksgiving night comes around, everybody's bored doing nothing. So I was like, I might as well just go ahead and do my stream because that is the only thing when I made like a Twitch schedule that I put in. I don't know why, but I don't know. Last week I was like, every Thursday we're doing it. Get them. Thursday is when we're going to be back after tonight. And hopefully I'll have more cool things to talk about. I'm very sore. I had like a bunch of fitness stuff today. So I'm sore and I'm sleepy, but I'm here. Said I would be. And sometimes when I get to doing stuff, I actually do it. Yeah, no, I know. Thanksgiving can be rough on people. So yeah, eat leftovers and watch me make stripes and talk about bullshit. Anyway, so we're here and we're back. Thanks for showing up, guys. We're still looking to get a handful more followers so that I can become an affiliate. And once I'm an affiliate, I have just a few more like accessibility things to do. Also, on suggestion of my friend Eric, I added a tips donation button on my profile page. I think I did that correctly. I don't know. So fingers crossed that works. So let's get striping. Also, today we're going to talk about Dazzle and the whole art world that inspired this stuff, sort of, in a way. I've talked about it briefly before, but I did some more research and now we're smarter. Whereas me, I'm like, let's make everybody vomit. Because I wanna work on that section. So we made it last time, like we did these stripes and we made that triangle up there, which is super dope. And so I want to fill in this zone right here. Yeah. I actually, when I was figuring out what I was going to do in terms of stripes and like which I knew I didn't want the whole room to be striped because it's a lot. It's a lot of work, but it's also like a lot visually. So I didn't want the whole room to be stripes. Gosh darn it. Anyway, what was I talking about before my phone distracted me? My weather girl moment. Optical illusions. Oh, which wall I was going to do in the radiator. So when I was first thinking about this room and which walls I wanted to stripe, because I knew I didn't want to do the whole room. It's a lot. It's a lot visually. It's a lot structurally. Like ceilings and the corners of ceilings are super hard and not fun. And so and also visually, aesthetically, it just doesn't, it works. It just doesn't work as good. I didn't want to do that. And I was thinking like, which walls am I going to stripe? And originally I was going to stripe that wall and that wall because of where the window is. And I know I want to take like selfies and stuff in the room. And if there's only one window and it's over there, so if the stripes are on this wall, it'd be really well lit during the daytime. So I thought that that was what I was going to do. And then when I thought about it, that meant that I'd have to stripe this wall that has the radiator and the window on it. And then you have to work around the window. I mean, on this wall, I have to work around a door, but it's just one door. And I have to work with the radiator because if I work against the radiator, it's going to ruin my whole vision. So I didn't want to do that. So that was the biggest reason why I went with these two walls. That's the story about the radiator. Now we're here. And I'm going to get up there and I've got my tape. I've got my scissors and I'm going to put my ruler somewhere safe. And we're going to think about things because I don't really know where this is going. Also, as promised, we're going to talk about Dazzle because all of this is inspired by the Dazzle Camouflage, which is, I talked about this in the first video, and then my dad, I guess it was the second video, my dad ended up watching the stream, or at least parts of it, and then he made a bunch of corrections. He's like, there was no aircraft carriers on World War I. And I was like, you're right. I just wasn't thinking when I was saying stuff, and I was just saying stuff, and I was on the internet, and I looked dumb, and now I'm self-conscious about it because my dad messaged me. Also, he was very nice about it. I'm sure it wasn't actually judgmental. My brain just has problems sometimes. And it got me thinking, I was like, I've seen a lot of Dazzle Camouflage, and I've seen like all these pictures and stuff, and I think they're really cool, but I don't know that much about it. Like, I know it was on boats, and its most important thing was for boats. But I did why? Because I wanted to be weird. I don't know. Um, and I personally got inspired by it from a book because there was an author who briefly mentions it in the story, and it plays an integral part in actually facial recognition for a character. Because originally I said it was a little flying craft, and then I re-looked at that too, and I was wrong there. That was a different kind of weird camouflage on the balloon. The Dazzle Camouflage was actually on what the author called the very ugly t-shirt. And the very ugly t-shirt principle is something that you can Google. But the idea is that like facial recognition technology can't recognize your face because the lenses are so confused about what's going on in space. They just can't follow, which is part of what this is about. Like when you get really into it, you just can't follow it. It's more about confusing rather than making it like obscure or hidden, which is traditionally what camouflage is about. Also, things I learned today, camouflage wasn't even really implemented on humans. I mean, it was always in the animal kingdom, but like humans didn't really use camouflage until the late 1800s or early 1900s. Like somebody wrote a book and was like, I observed all of these zebras hiding together, and I wondered why they did that. And I never thought about it, but it's true. Like before World War I, everybody in the military, like hell, in Scotland, they were wearing skirts and giant furry hats when they went to war. There was no, and that's traditionally what we think of, I guess, like Native Americans in other cultures, but like in the Western culture, warfare was done by these very complicated military outfits that were more like dress clothes than they were camouflage. That's another topic entirely, camouflage. Anyway, it's newer than I thought. I thought it was way older than that, but it's not. So that's cool. Because again, just things I never really thought about. But back to Dazzle. Because what happened? All right, how do I want to start this? I want to start the Dazzle conversation. Think about the camouflage stuff. Like keep all that in your brain. Not, it doesn't matter. There's not going to be a quiz or anything. I just think this stuff is fascinating and gives me something to talk about. So in the early 1900s, late 1800s, there was a lot of big, like, very recently post-Victorianism. Victorian, everything's super covered up. All the ladies are very prim and proper, and don't show your ankles, that sort of thing. Like the Victorian era, people know of it. It was important and impressive, and we still talk about it today. So like that's a whole thing. But it was very, very uptight. But like the late 1800s, early 1900s, all of that was sort of changing, and people's mindsets were slowly changing, and not necessarily in fashion, but in, I don't want to do that because I don't want to fight with those things. But in other senses, in the art world, like there's a timeline. I used to know it back when I took like graphic design classes and art history classes and stuff. I don't know it so much anymore, but like Cubism was becoming a thing. Impressionism was very popular. All the surrealism, surrealism wasn't quite yet, but like it's in the idea space there. All these different art movements that wasn't just that weren't based in realism. Like before that, a lot of things were just like, if it's not realist, we don't care. We're not even going to play that game. I think this is 8. It's more than 8, but it was supposed to be 8. That one's 8. That one's, I did a strange thing there, and that's fine. So art was getting weirder, basically. And you have Cubism coming out, and everybody's seen Picasso stuff, or at least knows of Picasso stuff. And I think he's one of the most prolific and famous cubists and futurists and stuff. And like it was these more graphic design styles that were bolder. They weren't necessarily looking at a figure and being like, oh, that is a picture of a person. I definitely see that person, or I definitely see that landscape. It was like there's a landscape, but it's more so the idea of the landscape or the idea of the person, the feeling of the person, than it is, hey, look at that guy. So all these art ideas were coming to fruition, and it was throughout all of Europe. This is a very Western art history lesson, by the way. So sorry for the rest of the world. Just because I think it's sad that society doesn't teach about other things as much as they teach about the West, especially the European stuff. Anyway, tangent. Uh, so all this weird stuff was happening, and futurism was really big. And futurism was, I shouldn't have read that, was all about movement and the movement of things without them actually moving. So not necessarily like movies or moving pictures, but just like the idea of movement and stillness and seeing movement and stillness. It was also about embracing the future. Like you've got this industrial revolution, machines are becoming powerful and important and useful, and society really hadn't had that before, at least not on this scale, not on a commercial scale, not in a way where like you could use a machine in your house. Like if you had a machine, you were lucky to have a sewing machine or whatever, or a loom, but like it's not the same as like, people didn't have machines. So futurism was the artistic mindset. Like a bunch of artists were like, yeah, machines, the future, basically. And so you got this cubism, this motion thing, and you've got these futurists doing their motion thing, but also, and cubism was big on like looking at one thing from different angles all at the same time. So you've got all of these ideas coming to fruition. Anyway, it comes to England, and the English, in a very British way. And again, this is all just stuff that I've read. If I misspeak, I'm not a historian. So don't think of me like some super, super smart know-it-all. I don't know. This is what I read. And I've got links and I could give you sources if you want them, but whatever. Anyway, so futurism and stuff gets to England. It's the early 1900s, super early 1900s. And the Brits were like, we reject your art style, but they were still inspired by it. Like they liked it, but it was just too garish for them. It wasn't. They felt like it was phony in a way. And you have a bunch of these dudes, basically rich white dudes, who are in art schools, and they all hang out and they all go to similar schools. And they probably met a few of these futurists and stuff. And also back then, every group of artists was like making manifestos, which manifestos blow my mind. I wish people still made manifestos in the same way as they did then, because basically manifestos were, from what I understand, a bunch of like overeducated people coming together and being like, I have these ideas. I'm gonna put these ideas out as if they're the cream of the crop and everybody should have them. And I'm gonna reject anybody else who doesn't believe in my ideas that I wrote down in this tiny booklet. I'm so smart. Anyway, so manifestos are cool. And there's this dude who, from what I can tell, from my limited research, his name is Wyndham Lewis. Again, there's not gonna be a quiz, so don't worry about it. Who's a, like, we'll talk more about him in a moment, but like, just keep in mind, I think as a human being, he was not a nice person, and I don't get the vibe that anybody liked him. But he must have been prolific or fascinating enough to make it to history books. Like, I don't know. Anyway, so Wyndham Lewis sees futurism, and he and a handful of other artists are like, no, not futurism. Vorticism is the way to go. And vorticism is where I like, because this is fascinating stuff and really plays into this style of art. Vorticism was very briefly lived in England and spearheaded by this, basically, Wyndham Lewis. And it was the idea of, it was all art forms. Like it wasn't just painting or visual art. It was like they wanted to incorporate writers and authors and photographs. And it was a whole, like it was an art in their brain. It was this art movement, all of art. If you considered it art, it could be vorticist art if you wanted to. But like, what was it that they actually said? So it embraced innovation, radical art, individualism, machinery, and urbanization. So kind of similar to futurism, but a little bit more focused. Also in their manifesto, the Vortrist manifesto, they completely rejected the Victorian era in like a paragraph. They're just like, it didn't happen. Nobody cares about it. That Victorian is stupid. And no, 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 which is crazy because Victorianism lasted for so long and it had kind of just ended. So that would be like, I don't know, that'd be like Gen Z coming out and being like the 80s, this integral time that everybody knows about. They never happened. Nope. Everything about it didn't happen. Don't care. And Borges just did that immediately. That was, I think, in their first like 2 pages of their manifesto, was just like Victorianism. Not exactly. They used flowery words. They used blast. Blast was their word that they used for like negating something. I think they blasted France at one point. Like, this is all before World War One. And this guy Wyndham, he was in charge of all this, and he wrote these journals, and they released them like magazines, and they weren't, from what I could tell, regular at all. It just seemed like every once in a while, it happened maybe a couple of times a year for a few years. They were like, "Yep, we're going to put out another magazine." Yeah. Like the Vortrist movement during the time of the actual movement had one art exhibition, just one. And somehow it's still in history books and people still talk about it. Uh, that's crazy. That'd be like my friend Tom got an art show. I just made up a name. And now art historians know him forever, or at least 150 years for this one whole art show. I just think that's crazy and funny in a weird way. And Borges, they were all about the vortex. So they wanted to create stillness in moving. They wanted to create motion in stillness. So everything needed to appear like it was moving, even though it wasn't. Cave paintings kind of use this too. The way that the like, if you look at traditional cave paintings, it looks like that bear has 3 legs or whatever. And scientists realize, I think kind of recently, or historians realized relatively recently, that it was because in our lights, it does look still, and it looks like that bear's got 3 legs. And we're like, wow, did all those 3-legged bears die? And no, it's not that. It's the way that the colors of the paint that they used and the way the light flickered on it. When the light flickered back and forth, it made basically an optical GIF where it looked like the bear was walking or running, or that's a whole other thing. But like movement within stillness, because in real life that bear wasn't moving. And so it was this avenue for vivid and violent ideas that could like reach the public. Because the other weird thing about Vorticism is it wasn't like the other movements like Impressionism or stuff like that, where it's like, no, this is only gallery quality. Only people in galleries are going to see this. It was on furniture and stuff. Like there was a company, and I wrote down the name somewhere, but I don't know where that sticky note is, where the company hired Wyndham and Edward Wadsworth. We'll talk about him more. He's a cool dude. And a handful of these other vortices, and basically it was these bold, crazy designs, and they're just like putting it on furniture and stuff that was meant to be in the home, meant to be decoration, but it was bold and violent and like, I don't know, it was different. And it all, like, the name Vorticism comes from the idea that being creative comes from an internal vortex within. Like there is a soul of creativity that you have to draw from, the vortex. So there's always this central spot that is constantly moving and creating motion and building motion. And Vorticism's idea was to capture that motion in their pieces, whether, through writing or poetry or photography or painting or stuff like that. Of course, I did more research on the painting aspect because even though I am not painting, I feel like this whole piece has a more painterly vibe than a poetry vibe. But I guess you could consider it poetry if you really wanted to. So Vorticism was dope. Or that's what I've learned. I think it's very cool. I wish there was more information on it. I really, uh, since looking into it, I want to get a copy of the Vorticist Manifesto. They're very like they only printed 2 copies for that first one, so of course not an original. That'd be insane. But I don't know, a replica because I think that'd be cool and nifty. That'd be a nifty thing to have in my life. Fingers crossed one day. Blast the Vorticist Manifesto. Even though, like I said, Wyndham was it has nothing to do with me being a Wyndham fangirl. Wyndham Lewis was uh, a fascist and an anti-Semite and a Hitler sympathizer and a bunch of other things. He was weirdly a feminist, especially which I do give him credit for that. Like when Vorticism first started, Cubists and Impressionists and stuff like that, they all had these like good old boys clubs, and even when Vorticism first became a thing, a handful of their founding members were like, no, no women, no girls allowed because girls are bad. Wyndham was like, dude, if it wasn't for my girlfriend, none of this could happen. So that's cool. And like she included other women, of course, in the movement. So it wasn't just like he had favoritism towards her. There was other women involved, which I thought was nifty. Where was I? Vorticism. The college students were doing the thing for the facial recognition. That is actually a form of CV Dazzle, which is computer visualization Dazzle, which I've also looked into, which is super, super cool. And we'll talk about that later. That stuff is dope. I don't know if you guys are interested in any of this, but I'm just going to keep telling you this weird story about Dazzle. Okay, Wyndham Lewis, Vorticism, their manifesto. Movement, the vortex of energy and creativity. So that whole idea, I'm just all about it. And a lot of them used, I mean, they used more color than I do, which is completely personal preference. But like, I don't want to say they invented optical illusions, but they really did lean in hard to optical illusions and what that meant and how it made the brain sort of wiggle. It like gave you this whole different brain path. Like it was new living abstraction. It was the whole thing. I actually have a note here that's like Wyndham Lewis sounds like a but the movement was cool, even though it was very short lived. And you have this dude Wyndham, and he's a part of it. And there's other dudes in it. And one of the dudes who comes back into play later for our Dazzle discussion is this guy named Edward Wadsworth, who actually sounds pretty dope. And Edward Wadsworth was born somewhere in England. Again, all this is in England. Why? I don't know. It's just where it happened. Oh, I need to add an extension to that little buddy. Probably need a bigger ruler for that straight edge. Anyway, Edward Wadsworth knew Wyndham Lewis. Those two dudes were friends. They went to the same schools. A lot of these guys did. And there's a bunch of other people involved, but I didn't pay much attention to them because they weren't a part of my understandment mission. And he was born to this really rich family in England, and his dad owned a company. I don't really know what the company did, but his dad just assumed, as fathers definitely did in the time, but still do to a certain extent, like, I own a business, and when I die, my son, or when I retire, my heir will take over my business. But Edward was in school, and even in like high school, and I mean, it wasn't high school back then, but the equivalent of high school, he was all about art. He was like, I'm going to be an artist. Sorry, Dad. He probably didn't say sorry, but it was very obvious. And he told his dad, he was like, I'm going to be an artist. That's my life. And also, this is late 1800s, early 1900s. And so, I mean, his dad was upset by it, but like didn't do anything about it, which is cool. I mean, at least Dad didn't reject him. Dad still paid for all of his art school and stuff, which mad respect. I think it takes a really specific kind of parent to be like, I don't agree with your lifestyle, but I'm still going to support you. I think that everybody should be more open-minded. And like, there's a little notch on the wall. I just wanted to get rid of it and try to support everybody in that sort of way. But I think it does, especially back at that time. It's impressive to be like, I don't want you to be an artist. That makes me very upset and sad, but I'll still pay lots and lots of money so that you can go to these fancy art schools and make a bunch of bougie ass friends who make manifestos. So Edward Wadsworth did that, and he met Wyndham Lewis, and like at one of the schools he made, Edward Wadsworth had this group of friends who for the time, again, very different from now, but like were just trailblazers. I don't like how this piece of tape sits. We're gonna not use it. This is dead to me now. And they were really good at traditional art. Like they all did classic style paintings. They were all doing portraits and landscapes and all this like oil paintings and tempera paintings and and traditional forms of art, but they were also just being weird and bold and dramatic. And I think they were called the Corsters or something. And even one of the professors, what did he say? It was great. He was like, I see that they're talented, but I have obviously brought up a pack of broods or something like that. He was like, they were too rebellious. He wasn't into it, which I thought was really funny. Because like that's your professor. Your professor's supposed to be on your side, at least in my experience when I went to college. Um, in spite of everything, even if they didn't agree with what you were talking about, professors were like, aha, I was your professor. I am so good. And Wadsworth's professors were like, goddamn kids, what are they doing? Being crazy. Which I thought was endearing and funny. And for some reason, Edward, Mr. Wadsworth, was considered like the leader of these weirdo art kids doing their thing. And they weren't quite fortresses yet, but they were, it's definitely in that realm. We're all at the same party. And so that was cool. And then Edward meets Wyndham, and then they start making this art. And like part of Edward's fascination, which is why I find him so fascinating, is like he likes big, bold lines. He wants to create movement, but in the most dramatic stillness possible. Like a single line is almost the epitome of stillness. It's two-dimensional, it's flat in all ways. There is nothing more flat than a line. And Wadsworth was the fact that you can create so much motion and complexity from that was just his jam. And mad respect, Stripe Guy. We'll get it. I too like stripes. And so that was his jam. He was doing those things. He was also like highly against impressionism. Like he could do it. He went to school. He had all those skills, but he was just like, no impressionists. I'm against you. Again, going back to within their first page of their manifesto, reject Victorianism. They're just not playing that game, which is very funny and strange, but cute. I don't know. I liked it. In the vortex. Anyway, he became like really into vorticism. That was his jam. I don't want to say he was Wyndham's best friend because I think that Wyndham had very few actual friends. And most people found him horrible to spend time with. And so they didn't. I mean, him and Wyndham were close enough where like Wadsworth was really integral to the Vorticist movement. He was doing those things. And then World War I happens. Basically. All this stuff is going on. Like all this art is happening. Futurism is happening. It comes to England, and now there's Vortricists, and the Vortricists reject Cubism and Futurism because it's too, what they say was too passive. Cubism was too passive for the Vortricists. So they're just like, no, none of this passive art. We don't deal with passivity at all. Like we are here, do the thing. And like I also said, they were making furniture and stuff. They wanted to get this angry, energetic motion out to the public in commercial ways. They wanted it in your house. They wanted it in your life. Like it wasn't just art to put on the wall and be like, oh, that looks nice. It was like an art as a way to live, which I feel like it's a little dramatic, but still fascinating. Like, what? Who are you? And I mean, I guess a lot of Dadaism kind of did that too. I don't know. But like the Vortricists actually worked on furniture and stuff. It wasn't just the idea of like, yes, let's get weird art to the masses. It was like, no, we're going to do it. Let's effing do it, bro. Except it wasn't a British accent. Says, no, let's do it. Tally-ho. Let's make art bold and put it in people's living rooms. And then they have to look at it. I guess back then they didn't really have living rooms. That's a whole other historical thing that I could talk about. But it's not on the agenda today. Sorry. Now that I finished that little triangle, we're going to close up this triangle. But first I'm going to read your comments because we've gotten to the point where World War I happens. Space pirates in the house! Oh, that's so exciting. Welcome to my very fascinating pseudo lecture on Dazzle Camouflage and Vorticism for the last 30 minutes because Vorticism is dope. Water break. World War I happens. Vorticism is a thing. It's in England. They're doing stuff. I don't know what happens to Wyndham Lewis at this point. He's off doing some bullshit. Because that's, from what I could tell, that was Wyndham Lewis's whole life. And even later when people asked him about like Vorticism and that whole thing, he was just like, it wasn't really a collective. It was just some ideas that I had at the time. And it's just about me. It was all me. And it's just simply not true. Anyway, there's this other dude. So there's only like three main people that I'm talking about. Wyndham, we're done with him. Edward Wadsworth, who's still fascinating, where he's still on the boat in the storyline. And then there's this other guy, Norman Wilkinson. I was going to call him Nathan, but it's Norman. Norman Wilkinson. And he's really the person to credit for for all these shenanigans. And I'll tell you why. I won't tell you why yet. Norman Wilkinson is a traditional artist. He went to a bunch of art schools, a lot of the same ones that Homeboy and other dude went to. He's very, very good. I mean, not very, very good, but like he's very classical. He likes making seascapes. He studies with artists who only paint seascapes. He spends a whole year learning, like technical drawing, basically. That's not what it's called, or it wasn't what it was called back then, but where it's just technically looking at stuff and then drawing it as such, which is a whole very specific skill set. Like when I went to Arcadia, I minored in studio art, but one of Arcadia's claims to fame was that we had an anatomical illustration program, and that's just not very common because it's such a specific skill set. It's still very useful. You still need illustrations. Like I don't care how good cameras get, you need somebody who can draw those things so that you can see it, visualize it, learn about it. And so he wasn't doing anatomical illustration, this Norman guy, Mr. Wilkinson. He was doing other stuff, but it's still in that technical vein. He was very technical. And then while he was doing that, he found out that he really liked seascapes and water stuff. So he was doing a lot of those. That was his passion. And then when he joined the career force, like he taught some, he did a bunch of other stuff, but he was mostly working as a graphic designer. And for those of you who don't know, graphic designers, and especially back then, and poster makers and stuff, it's not the same thing. Like you're still an artist. I'm not trying to take away from like the artist niche of a graphic designer, but you don't have to be a really good illustrator to be a really good graphic designer. You just have to be really good at putting the pictures together in one home and have people understand it. That's what graphic design is about. It's about taking separate graphics and making them understandable in one space. It's a very limited definition. There's better ones on the internet. You can Google it. But it's different. It's its own thing. And that's what he was making money. He was working at railroad companies, airplane companies, anywhere at the coast, anywhere he could travel, anywhere where he could look at the ocean and in his free time do these waterscapes. And that was his jam. He liked ocean stuff. He liked traveling. And he was doing posters for companies. And that was his jam. And then World War I started. And we're back. I really couldn't find much on Norman Wilkinson and like what he did in his life. He wasn't in some crazy artist collective. He didn't do anything much before all of this. He was just some guy who liked painting the ocean, who was born in Cambridge. And I don't really know how World War I worked in England. To be honest, I probably don't know much about how World War I worked in America either. But I probably have a better understanding of that than I do of England because that's where I took history classes, was in America. So I don't know if there was the draft necessarily, and maybe there was. I also don't know if in England there's like a civic responsibility or duty, because I know in some countries, if something happens, it doesn't matter whether or not there's a draft. If you're of a certain age and gender, you have to join the military. That's just the rules. And in some countries, like you've hit 18 and congratulations, you have to spend 4 years in the military. And I don't think that's how England works. But World War I happened and a lot of people joined the military. And I don't know if it was by choice or by draft or by civic duty or just, I don't know. They did it. They joined the military. And Norman joins, I don't know if it's by choice, and he's in the military now. So, flashback, we're back to Edward Wadsworth, who is the fascinating one. And again, I don't know the exact timeline on this because my brain doesn't do dates very good. At least doesn't retain them. Like I can comprehend information, but dates and sometimes they're there. I know that the first like color film camera that had photos that we can still look at today was 1833. That's probably the only date I know. And then color film didn't come back for a very long time. It was in Russia. Anyway, Edward Wadsworth, somewhere in this World War I early time, did join the military by choice, from what I understood, from what I read. And I believe personally, this is just a personal feeling on this, he did it partly because like he was kind of a technical dude. Like even though he was going to art school and he loved this artist movement, he was really into that. I think that he still had probably some form of guilt about not being that man's man for his father. I think that led into it. He also had a very technical brain, which is part of the reason why he was so interested in lines and vorticism and stuff like that. Like he was into machinery and stuff. He did school for machinist things and had some engineering background as well. He did join the military also. And like I said, him and Norman knew of each other. They went to the same schools. They just weren't necessarily in the same circle of friends. Partially because Norman did not care about Vorticism or Futurism or Cubism. Like he knew they existed because they were popular. That'd be like, I don't know, what's a good analogy. So Banksy, who's a really famous street artist, and I don't know Banksy's interaction with Instagram, but it'd be like going up to Banksy and being like, hey, have you heard of Instagram? And Banksy's like, no. What? Oh my God. Like, he knows about it. It's just not his medium. And so that's how Norman feels about Cubism and Vorticism and Futurism and all that stuff. He's like, yeah, it's a thing. People are doing it. It's fine. That's cool, buddy. I guess I could have done a better example in the music world, in music genres, but whatever. Anyway, Norman and Edward are both in the military, and they're both in the Navy. And U-boats are this huge issue that they're having because this is the first time in war that anybody's had submarines, and it was mostly Germany did that. Hi, friends. So Germany had all these U-boats, these submarines, and that had never been used before. Like people were just drop them. What do we do? And did it suck for battleships and things? Totally. But one of the biggest issues that they were having was with merchant ships. It made it really hard to trade goods and to get goods into England specifically, because U-boats were just taking ships down left and right. It was a whole thing, and that sucked. A lot of people died, of course. A lot of stuff was lost, and they didn't know what to do. And the tactic before this was actually to paint all the ships black, because in a big ocean of things, when you have a lot of water, especially at night, like the ocean looks black. Why not? That's how camouflage works on land. And again, camouflage is still a relatively new idea. It's only been around for 30 or 40 years at this point. that'd be like hairspray being invented in the 80s and you don't know how to use it. That's a horrible example. I don't know. I don't know why the 80s are in my brain. I wasn't even alive then. Oh, I think it's just because that's the amount of time we're thinking about. Anyway, camouflage is super new, and they don't really understand it. Uh, and 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 their whole idea of like, let's paint all the ships black so they can't be seen in the ocean, it's not working. And what they found out is that painting the ships black, especially for the U-boats, actually helped the U-boats find the ships and locate them and target them because it made a giant silhouette. If there was any light at all, you were like, wow, that's a boat, and that's exactly where it's going. So it made it really, I mean, I don't want to say really easy because I don't know how easy it is to do, but it made it pretty easy to locate and target boats and like aim their torpedoes and stuff like that. Um, so that wasn't working. They had to do something else. And and here's where it gets exciting, fam. At least in my opinion. So we got this Wilkinson dude, Mr. Norman, and he has spent a lot of his life looking at the ocean. And he's privy to some stuff. And he's read a lot of the research on camouflage, like he knows about these things. He knows about a lot of stuff. And he's in the Navy and he's not super high up, but he's there and he's like, what if, hear me out. What if we do the opposite? And everybody was like, what? And he's like, well, we don't really need to hide. We can't hide the boats. It's impossible. There's nothing that we can do to hide the boats. They're big, they're metal, they don't move very fast. They're merchant boats. Like, we can't hide them. It doesn't work. But we could potentially make it harder to hit them. Because if you can't find the boat or predict where it's going, how can you aim a torpedo? How can you aim anything for it? Uh, so let's like flip the script and change it up and do something different. And and everybody's just kind of like, okay, okay, guy, what are you doing? And and he's like, no, hear me out. We're not trying to stop or hide them. We're just trying to confuse them. And if we can break up the shape to confuse the brain, to confuse the eye, especially from a periscope, because that's what they're really hunting for. It's like they're hunting from the periscope. Like, you can't find where the ship is going or where it's at or how big it is. So how are you going to aim the torpedo? How are you going to do it? Um, and and they have nothing. They're losing merchant ships left and right, and they've got nothing going for them. So the military basically was like, okay, whatever, go for it. And they gave him a team. Um, they gave him a team of, and this is what I think is really cool. So all these men were joining the military, and all these women were taking on jobs, and a lot of them were working for the Red Cross, and they're doing stuff like that. And also in art schools and stuff, they had more availability for women to join art school because it was hard to keep in an old boys club because all of these old boys are going to war. Like, I'm not saying that, I mean, some of them are dying, but like, they're not here. So if we still want to keep art alive, we should let these ladies go to art school and do artist things. And so Wilkinson is doing stuff and he has this idea, like, let's confuse the U-boats. Let's make it weird. Um, and and they gave him a team. They gave him they first started off by giving him 5 lieutenants, like male artists, like some of these dudes who had left art school to join the war. Wadsworth wasn't involved yet. Sorry, spoiler, Wadsworth gets involved. They gave him five of these dudes, artists, they called them lieutenants, And they gave him 2 male modelers to make like small, tiny boats. They gave him a female modeler, which I wish I had more information on her because she had a job that just women didn't have then, or a skill rather. Like, I don't know how she learned that skill. Like, who is this chick? She is so cool. And then they gave him 11, I read this differently in different sources, 11 female art students that they called clerks, and they were called lady clerks, something. Yeah. Lady clerks for coloring plans. Who are these like female art students who Wilkinson said, "Hey, I've got this idea. We're gonna make stuff look crazy to try to confuse U-boats, and I need your help." And these ladies were like, "Okay, dude." And the other interesting thing is, so back then they have all these records of all these people who were in the war, especially like the Red Cross and stuff, and like what your job was and what your position was historically. But like none of these women in this like you can find some of the men involved in the program, but like none of these women were named, and it's for security reasons. They didn't want it. They found that women were more vulnerable and weak spots. So, and these women were doing a super important job. They're disguising big ships from outside forces. So they don't want to compromise that. And they need these women. They need these women to do these things. So you can't find the names of these women, which is sad. And the other thing is that Norman was all about it, and he auditioned them. He would like look at their skills and be like, "No, I want this woman or this person rather because she's very good at blank or things." And he encouraged that women were on his team. And I don't know, maybe I'm just looking at it through a rose-colored lens, and I think that he's a feminist because at that point, so many dudes were just like, women can't have jobs. And especially women can't have special military jobs and all this other stuff. And there's this guy who's like, put them to work. This is great. They're so useful. It might have just him being like, I like pretty ladies and I like that my team is full of pretty ladies. So I'm just going to hire a bunch of pretty lady students to be on my team. I don't know. I don't know the guy. I don't know how it went down. I wasn't alive back then. But I like to think about it as this dude thought that these women had dope skills and then gave them cool jobs. So that's his team. And they gave him a basement room in some building that, again, I wrote the name down and then I forgot. And they let him make models. He made tiny boats and he covered them in these crazy patterns. And there's documentation of like the idea of what the pattern should look like. And some of the modelers would paint the models themselves and make the models, and some of them would just design the idea of the plans. My hair looks ridiculous. And it was this basement room making tiny boats. And then they would look at these miniature models through a mimicked periscope and see whether or not you could find out where the boat was headed. That's really the only thing they could look for at that point because they couldn't test it. There was a field test that you could do. Where do you find it's giant boats. But you could, calculate whether or not the boat was, heading south by southwest or north by northeast or whatever, however that works. That's a whole skill set I didn't look into. And they found out you couldn't. It made it significantly harder to determine which direction a boat was going when it was dazzled, covered in these giant stripes, these giant lines, these big old optical illusions. And the other weird thing is so when we see pictures of it, we often think that a lot of it was big, bold black and white, but it was not. It was magenta and green and purple. It was whatever big, bold colors they could find that contrast each other, they could put next to each other. They just did that. And yeah, and eventually they brought the king in, and apparently the king was somehow somewhat trained in this military art of figuring out which direction a boat was going from a periscope. and he couldn't do it. He said that the picture or the model that he was looking at on its little model thing was going one direction, and then in reality, when you step up and you look at it from above, it was going somewhere completely different. He was like, this is the best thing. We haven't had any way to solve our U-boat problem, and now we do. Let's do it. Let's get all the boats on board with this crazy camouflage. Because again, it wasn't to hide the boats, it was to make them more confusing. I don't want to hide from anybody. I just want to confuse them. It's just, and in a weird way, it was also to kind of like fascinate them. Like if they were way too wrapped up in whatever is going on over there, then they're going to pay less attention to whatever they're trying to do that's malicious. At least that's the idea. That's the whole idea of this. It was optical distortion. That was really what they were working towards. It's something that Wilkinson said specifically. It was like, if you can't hide from the enemy, confuse them. So they made a handful of models and they showed the king, and the king was confused. And the king was like, let's fucking do it, guys. Dazzle these boats dough. By 1917, there was an order that like all merchant ships should be dazzled. All of them. And Norman Wilkinson was in charge of this. He was like, oh, okay, cool. Let's make some weird boats, guys. And so he amassed a team of a bunch of people, but like he's quoted as saying at one point he had like up to 20 women on this team of painting boats and designing the designs of these optical illusions. And that the women really did play an integral role of, sorry, there's dust on it and I don't want dust to be on the wall forever. These women were super integral to the team in making these designs, making it happen. And I think he actually met his wife in one of these Dazzle boat design teams. So that was 1917. And if you know anything about war, stuff was happening in the war. I don't know much about World War I. My mom's a history teacher. I should know more, but I don't. So sorry. It was 1917. Whatever war stuff was happening in 1917, England was dazzling their merchant ships and some of their other boats. But like that was, the decree was that all merchant ships get dazzled. And so they were. They just were. And Wadsworth ends up on these teams. And so before Wadsworth, like the dazzling was a thing, and the dazzling, not bedazzling, that's different. Though you could definitely use shiny things in a Dazzle camouflage and it would still count because it's just about confusion. Like this striped mess that I do is traditionally what we think of when we think of Dazzle camouflage. But what I have learned is that Dazzle camouflage can legit be anything that's completely absurd. I'm honestly surprised that absurdism isn't quoted more, because even when I was looking into Vorticism and stuff, it had a very absurdist vibe to it. And I was like, why aren't these guys friends? Absurdism is my jam. I love it. I think it's so good. So Wadsworth joins the team, and Wadsworth is all about these big, bold, striped designs. And since he's a painter, he paints a lot of the boats in a Vorticist style. But while these boats have Vorticist patterns on them, like it's, for lack of a better word, it's very meta. And Wadsworth is spearheading all of that. So that's cool. Good on him. Like I said, he's a cool dude. He's probably so far one of my favorite characters in my historical research. Yes, in history you can have favorite characters. Why not? Who told you couldn't, and why did they lie to you? So Wadsworth is painting boats. Not only is he painting the actual boats, he's painting paintings of the boats that are painted by him. He's painting the paintings that he's already painted. I'm here for it. I'm so here for it. And the other thing is like he's a much better artist at the end of the day than Wilkinson ever was. And Wilkinson recognizes this and kind of like puts Wadsworth in charge of a lot of these bigger scale projects. Like Wilkinson is the idea guy. He's like, this is the idea that I had. This is what we're going to do. This is how it's going to work. And then he's just like, you're better at it. You do it. And I admire that too, because it takes a lot of intelligence and just like comfort with your in confidence to be like, hey, it's my idea, but like you're so much, you do it. Do it. Because and it's not that he even took credit. Like, I mean, people credit him for the Dazzle Camouflage idea and like putting it into action, but it wasn't his thing. He wasn't the best at it. It wasn't even his style. Like he straight up, he's like, I like realism, but painting a boat realistically isn't going to work. Like apparently at the same time in this whole camouflage idea, the Americans are trying to get on board and they're like, yes, we're going to Americanize it. We need to camouflage our boats too because U-boats are horrible. So many people had so many crazy ideas. And like even Thomas Edison joined in on that game at one point. Thomas Edison's idea was
to cover the boats in canvas and then paint them like clouds.
how are you going to attach a giant ass canvas to a big ass boat? What you thinking? But it's Edison and everybody thinks that Edison is a god, so it doesn't matter. Wilkinson has dazzled a bunch of boats. It's a whole thing. I'm currently regretting a stripe that I put up, I think. But I think I can fix it. Yeah. Yeah, I can fix that. You can't see it. So up here, this is where I'm looking. So what I don't like, so I made this gap to match this gap so that this line would move up like this. But I really want this gap to match this gap. We can fix that. Happy little stripes. We're going to make them happy little stripes. England is like, yo, it's 1917. The war is going on. Let's, all the boats get stripes. All the boats get crazy stuff because it's not really stripes. Like the other thing is like when I think of Dazzle, I think of stripes, obviously, but like it's not. It's any amalgamation of giant, bold, geometric patterns all in one place, all close together. And we see it in interior design pretty frequently these days. Like that is a thing. And in fashion design, people do that too. Like pattern clashing or pattern matching is a huge, especially, I don't know, I'm very bad at pattern clashing. It makes me uncomfortable. But like it's a thing that people do in fashion all the time. And that's all hypothetically a form of dazzle. It's 1917. All the British merchant vets are getting dazzled. They're hecka stripey or colorful or whatever. And sadly, a lot of these documents about them were destroyed in a fire or thrown away or whatever, which happens in war. And that's sad. So it's really hard to determine what colors exactly they used because it's just they didn't use color cameras, even though they could have, because like I said, the first color film camera was 1833. People just did not use them for reasons. Anyway, so what's this? This is 4. Okay. So, one moment. 4. 4. 4. 4. Eventually, America joins the war. And they have Thomas Edison talking about how they're going to cover boats in canvas and paint a bunch of clouds on it. And America's like, yeah, great idea. Actually, no, America's like, that's not a great idea. We can't, how we going to move to boats, Edison? How do we move those boats? And so they didn't do that. But they were talking, and they had a handful of other ideas that I didn't decide to learn because the name that stuck out was Edison, and then I stuck on that and then forgot all of the other names of all the other people. Because they were there. I just don't know them. Wilkinson, he's like, I'm going to go to America. And Americans were seeing these British dazzled ships. Like, they were hard to miss. Like, if you were on the naval theater, I think is what they call it in the military. Like everybody knew about these crazy British ships. It everybody knew because, like I said, they weren't hidden at all. They were the opposite of hidden. They were wham bam, I'm a big old boat. And so America had seen this, and even some Americans were like, "What are you doing? Why are you doing that?" And this piece of tape is bad. It's got a bunch of bad bad wrinkles in it. I think I need a new roll because this one is at its bitter edge. And England was like, "Yo, guys, we got this idea." But the other thing is, it hasn't at this point in the war, it hasn't really been actually tested that much. Like Wilkinson and his team of these awesome ladies were made these models, and then the king liked it, and then just made the order like, nah, all boats, big old bold stripes, let's go. Um, which I also think is funny. And what else? Somebody said something specifically that I thought was really funny. The only reason that thinking that Dazzle Camouflage would work is because a lot of people and the king just didn't see a reason why it wouldn't work. That was it. That was their whole reasoning. They're like, well, yeah, I guess that makes sense. Let's go. Let's paint all the boats this way. But they had inflated it in their heads that it's going to be this great idea. And so they did it. And then everybody in the world was like, wow, those British boats are a thing. But they had all these ideas. And I don't know if you'd call it pseudoscience necessarily, but it's kind of pseudoscience because they didn't have data. And they've made all these reasons up, and America sees it, and they're like, "What are you guys doing over here?" And so England sends Norman Wilkinson over to America, and he's like, "This is why this works. So it's a great idea." And then Teddy Roosevelt, who is just an insane person as it is, was like, "Yes, let's go." So America puts an order where all of their merchant vessels need to be dazzled. And Wilkinson makes a team over there and makes some more boats. So like by the end of World War One, over a over 1,200 American boats were dazzled, and over 4,000 British boats were dazzled. 4,000, and these are big boats. Like it's huge. There's articles from the Smithsonian Magazine that was like that say it nicely, and they say it's an explosion of dissonant stripes and swoops and contrasting colors, which makes it sound really nice. And then somebody, I forgot who, but somebody else quotes and says, going into one of these battlefields or one of these docks is like walking into a futurist's nightmare. You get all these floating, colorful, abrasive, just optical harassment going on. And I love that idea. I wish I could have seen it. And also because of the time, there's some photographs of these boats. We all know, I mean, I guess we don't all know. But like, and there's some really cool historical photos. I've seen them. I'll add links to them in the video description later. It's just, but they didn't have the cameras to really capture what I wanted to see. And I mean, I guess the visceral nature of art is that it doesn't matter how you photograph it or document it, especially visual art. It's not the same unless you see it in person. A lot of art, most art. I mean, I guess not photography because photography is meant to be photography, but like most art, there's a visual a visceral component that doesn't translate. But for this, like I feel like even if you had just different lenses, stuff that we have access to today that they didn't have, drones to fly over these docks to see these crazy, just colorful monstrosities that are also military. Like this isn't a that's weird. It's so weird. I love it. I love it. It's so good. And mostly just because a bunch of people were like, yeah, sounds like a good idea. And I miss a more whimsical idea. It sounds so unreal when you really think about it, in my opinion. Like what? That being said, sounding unreal. So when England was dazzling their boats, they did make a few models and they made a few plans, and it was kind of mapped, but mostly they would just commission an artist to supervise and like Edward Wadsworth and be like, all right, paint this boat. And then they would. And the artist was in charge, and then the boat was dazzled. Ta-da, we did it. Whereas once it came to America, or at least in the American theater, in a very American fashion, there was lots and lots of plans. Like they had drafts of designs and design plans written up, and those had to be approved by certain military officers and like weirdly tested in model space to see if they would work at all. And that was very confirmed, which in my opinion seems like a waste of money and time. You're in the middle of a war. Why make a bunch of plans for this ridiculous thing? Like it's not okay, America, live your life, do your thing. So yeah, American war is, war is dumb, whatever. But America made it much more regimented, and because it's America and they're like this is super top secret stuff, they destroyed a lot of these plans. So there's a few preserved. I think there's two preserved prints of like some of these plans, and one of them's in the Smithsonian, and then one of them is maybe in a private collection. I don't know. There's photos of them on the internet, and they're cool. I'm not gonna lie, they're cool, and I guess it's a cool tidbit of history or piece of things that we have. But like, I don't like it. Why didn't you just commission some artist to be like, hey, make me a stripy boat? That's pretty much all I have on like historical Dazzle stuff. It gets fascinating in the modern times, and I have less documentation of modern Dazzle because that's where they really used it. And for a long time, they only used it on boats and primarily like the bottom of boats. But then once planes became a thing, more in World War II, they started putting it on the top of boats. And in my other stream, I said they put it on aircraft carriers. And thing one, aircraft carriers weren't around. I probably mentioned that earlier. But thing two is they definitely didn't put it on aircraft carriers because if they did, it made it very hard for the airplanes to land on the aircraft carriers because they couldn't figure out where they were supposed to land. So that would be bad. That being said, in World War II, they did dazzle a few planes. Not many, but a few of them. They're like, this is a great idea. And then, especially in the Pacific Theater, it was a horrible idea. That's what they discovered, is that it was actually a very, very bad idea. So they only did a few planes, and that was, I think, only in America. I don't think, I mean, the Brits still dazzled boats in World War II. But also eventually like other militaries caught wise and they combated it. And when the data came in after the war and people ran some numbers, it was really hard to determine the effectiveness of dazzling. Like the the dazzle boats got hit with torpedoes slightly less, and the ones that did get hit sunk less. Um, so like hypothetically, it kind of worked. Do I want to? Okay, okay, I have an idea. I've figured out what I'm doing. I marked the wrong thing, but I've got an idea of where we're going next. And fortressism. Oh my God, still super fascinated with fortressism. But we're kind of done with that because actually World War One started, and then that whole group disbanded. All the fortresses, like they either joined the war or they died or they just did other things. So it was a very short-lived art movement. And I want to say that like their last journal magazine thing, that was written like at its first 3 months of the war. And then they're just like, nope, we're done. No more. So I did Picasso, that guy, who was a cubist, and we talked a little bit cubism earlier. Later on, like post-war, dazzling, basically said, what was it? He was like, and I think part of this is because he knew Wilkinson. Wilkinson was an artist, relatively famous, whatever, and but wasn't into any of that. And then Picasso comes in and he's like, oh, this was definitely invented by Cubism, which is what I did. I'm the Cubist. So he tried to take credit for for Dazzle and Dazzle Camouflage, which I think is silly. I mean, it's definitely inspired by it, but like I said, a thing is going on, you know? Just because you don't like EDM music doesn't mean it's not popular. That that was the analogy I should have made earlier instead of Banksy. But yeah, Picasso tried to take credit for that. And I guess that some people still credit Picasso for it. But when I look at, especially after doing all the research that I've done, um, I definitely see a stronger tie in Fortressism, which is also relatively inspired by Cubism in the Dazzle Camouflage world. So that's like traditional Dazzle history lesson, uh, which is all very fascinating. And Norman Wilkinson is credited for all that. And Edward Wadsworth helped a ton. He actually supervised most of the British fleet. I think like out of the 4,000 boats, Wadsworth supervised over 2,000 of them being painted. I check my numbers; they're probably wrong. The 4,000 ships is correct, but the other thing about Wadsworth, I don't know, maybe. Oh wait, sorry, my father has news about the French. What? Picasso also suggested that the French army should issue Harlequin costumes to the infantry. And we would assume what he's joking, but that's true. It's the French army. My dad is also weirdly against the French. No, like that didn't surprise me. And I think part of that's because Picasso was all butthurt that somebody's using an art style that he feels like he piloted and pioneered, but he's not getting the credit for it. So of course, he thinks that he's the bee's knees and that he should get the credit for it. But he shouldn't. It's not that's not how that works. He didn't do it. Wilkinson did it. And Wilkinson didn't even like it. He just thought it'd be the best idea. And at the end of the day, he was the best marketer. He got people on board. And I think that's the real crazy part. Like, Wilkinson got people hyped. He got people so hyped that two separate superpower nations decided to paint entire fleets of ships in this style, which is what? What? That's crazy. That's so crazy. So I'm stuck over here because I'm trying to do a thing. And mathematically, it should work this way, but visually, it doesn't. And I think that that's a big issue that you run into when you're doing this style of visualization. Um, it's okay. Let's do that part and then we'll see what happens. Not as crazy as Thomas Edison. I feel like Thomas Edison is way crazier than people think that he is. Also, history lesson. Not that you've asked for this, but you're here. Thomas Edison stole so many ideas and took credit for other people's ideas. Like, we credit Thomas Edison for inventing the light bulb, but true facts, I think it was like 50, at least 20 years before Edison, light bulbs were being produced. They weren't being mass produced. They weren't the best, but people were playing with that idea. It was a thing. What Edison should be credited for is he made the first commercially viable light bulb, which is true. He did do that. Also, his whole feud with Tesla, which is crazy. Tesla, the inventor, not the car. That angle's wrong. Oh, that angle's much more wrong. Let me breathe out. Stick. It's better. It's still not right. This is why I hate corners. Because they're not square, and what works in your brain doesn't work in real life. And is this what I want? It's a little further out than it. What if I took that idea and then just moved it? Nope, moved it too much, and we're back. Still too much. Oh, my shoulders are so sore. Not from this, from handstands and other physical activity. It's close enough. Close enough for spitting. Don't spit at my wall. Even though I did spill Red Bull on it last week. I guess that's what I wanted. Kind of. I wish it. Yeah, we're just gonna. It's fine. It's fine. That whole bit. I should have moved the camera since we're up here doing these things. Anyway, so then World War I happens. We stop using Dazzle. World War II happens. We kind of use Dazzle, but not really. And again, it's entirely based in, well, why not? Sure. Sounds like a great idea. Let's make all the boats that way. And then it loses favor. It loses popularity, which makes sense because it's garish. And honestly, very not British, which I think is also fascinating, that the British were the ones who were like, yeah, let's make some weird boats, guys. I'm talking about something different. I'm talking about my current stripe situation. And I think, nope. I think if I put this here, I can work my way back into the corner. There we go. That's better. Yeah, we can work with this. Cool. Cool, cool, cool. People know of it. It was a historical movement. Big old boats, big old dazzling boats. It was great. It doesn't really come back into the zeitgeist until computers become a thing, especially tracking and facial recognition. And it's because the algorithms that you use for tracking and facial recognition are based on algorithms that our brain uses for tracking and facial recognition and stuff like that. And what Dazzle, or the type of camouflage, does is it disrupts all of that. It takes all of those ideas and makes them wiggly. So if it confuses our brain, which is a very complex biomechanical thing, it's going to confuse a computer. And so relatively recently, I want to say 2010s, it might have been in the early 2000s, but it's probably not, probably later than that. People started thinking like, well, how do we not get recognized by these computers that hold these facial recognition things? And that's where computer visualization Dazzle, or the facial recognition stuff that people mentioned earlier, really comes into play. And that's also, and I guess it might have been the early 2000s because that's when William Gibson was writing Spook Country and the Zero History trilogy, and the whole series is called the Pattern Recognition series, which is why he talks about them in his book. I guess I could just put that all the way in there and it's gonna be fine. But the idea is that if you confuse the computer enough, that the computer won't recognize you, it won't recognize faces, it won't track you, it can't distinguish who you are or where in space you are, which has some merit. And it works to a certain degree. And not only is it a clothing option, the biggest use, or I don't know if use is the right word, the biggest thing they've done with it is for facial recognition. It's makeup looks, it's hairstyles, it's stuff that you can do with your makeup and your hair to make it so that your face can't be tracked on CCTV. It kind of works. And it used to work better when the algorithms were worse. Technology moves so fast nowadays that those things don't work as well as they used to. And what it comes down to is like, you can still do what they call CV Dazzle, or computer visualization Dazzle. That's still a thing. Like, you can do that, but you have to specifically style your makeup and or clothes and the way that you dazzle. You have to do it specifically to combat the algorithm that the facial recognition software is using. So if you know that all the CCTV in this area uses a specific algorithm, you can design your camouflage, your dazzle, to fool those cameras. But if you go to a different precinct or you're using an iPhone instead of an Android or whatever, you might not be camouflaged from those computers or cameras or things. So it, again, similar idea, same vein, which is fascinating. And maybe I'll do a CV Dazzle makeup tutorial. That'd be fun. I was looking at a lot of these makeup looks. But again, to do that, it doesn't necessarily work. Hypothetically, it should work. All the ideas say it should work, but according to actual statistics, sometimes. Sometimes, I guess. Which it isn't super far off from the logic they used with CV Dazzle. 24. I think 24 is a good idea. Uh, why did it work? Well, there was no reason it shouldn't work. Or why did you do it? Well, there's no reason why it shouldn't work. CV Dazzle is a thing. And there's so many really cool artists who work in this style, like this stripy big style that I really like. But I had a lot of issues finding their name. There was a few, like, what's his name? Is it Nick Haffersman? I wrote it down, but I wrote it down somewhere else. Not on any of my sticky notes on the wall. If you go to San Diego, where I used to live, there's an airport. There's an airport installation that uses basically tiny light reactive screens to create different dazzle patterns on the side of this giant building. And what's cool about it is what they did. It wasn't really to disguise the building. Everybody knew the building was there, but like it made it so that it is moving slightly. But it always looks like it's moving. It looks like it's motion. It's better than a big monolithic car park or whatever it actually is. And that's what they were going for. And honestly, even though it is artistic, it was definitely more of a feat of engineering than it was a feat of artistic vision, which is back to historically what Wadsworth was kind of into it about. Like that was part of his jam, was that there's a weird mathematical fascination with it that's just as fascinating to me as the fact that it's a giant visual art piece. So the San Diego airport installation is a really good example of modern dazzle, which reminded me of something else. Oh, another place that you'll see dazzle often is on test cars. So when a company is making a car or making a new model of a car, a lot of times they'll dazzle it. and they usually, you can find a ton of pictures of this. And they usually put a logo on it somewhere because they're cool. And they can. And because it does look cool. Like, let's face it, it looks cool. And I'm a slave to aesthetics. So if it looks cool, I'm invested. But they do it so it's a test car. It's a test model of a car. They don't want people knowing what the exterior actually looks like, definitely. And the Dazzle Camouflage obscures that. You can't see the fine details. Your eyes get too lost in the overall aesthetic of the vehicle. So you can't see it, which I think is a really charming way to use it. So I've got 16 and then 24. It's all the information I really have about Dazzle Camouflage. There's lots of stuff, and there's lots of people who use these things. And I'm hoping, like, I'm still gonna do a bunch more research and look into some more of this stuff. And like I said, I'll post articles in the description of this video of the stuff that I did talk about. But as I find more artists who use this technique, like there's specifically one guy, and I can see his video in my brain, and I can't think of his name, and I've been looking for it for the last month, who uses tape to make really fascinating visual pieces. And he's commissioned to do art galleries. And his stuff is very cool. And I'm pretty sure I saw a video of his stuff before I ever taped up my first room in Dazzle. So, like I've said from the beginning, I am not the inventor. It is my original work, but like, I'm not the Norman Wilkinson of this project. I am much more similar to Edward Wadsworth, except of supervising boats and having the government pay me lots of money. I make no money, and I just make stripes in the office and put it on Twitch. Oh, there's also a conservation, what are they called? SSCS? I'll find it later. There's an ocean conservation program, and their entire fleet is dazzled in this similar way. And it's not at all for camouflage, and they're not worried about U-boats. It's completely because it's great for branding. Everybody knows their boats. No, 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 your boat, it's covered in stripes. Merrily, 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 merrily. It's like a futurist nightmare. 10, 20, 32. That is how you count. This diagonal is effing me up 6 ways from Sunday. Daryl, Corey, maybe. Oh, is that the guy with tape stripes? Maybe. The video tends to show up in my timeline some way or another at least twice a year. Whether it's like a friend just saw it and they've sent it to me and I'm like, that guy. Or if it's me just scrolling and I find it and I'm like, oh yeah, this guy. And then I watch his videos briefly. And every time I see his videos, I'm like, I should remember this guy's name because I think he's very cool. But I don't. Because my retention for things is mediocre at best. I get all the right ideas. Usually I have the major ideas mostly correct. But the actual details end up fuzzy. I'm that way a lot in social situations too. Nope, that's definitely not the right angle. If I ever do end up getting a GoPro for this stream, I will strap it. I'll strap one of the cameras to my head so that you guys can see some of the more detailed stuff that I get all finicky about. Or I'll do a whole stream where we're just striping with the camera strapped to my head. I don't know. This whole thing might take me less time than I thought. When we first started, I remember saying that like November, all of November will be striping, but I don't know. I don't know. That first day seemed like it moved really slow, but like every day after that, we made solid progress. I mean, it's definitely moving slower than the other wall, but that's just because I'm talking. Every week I end up talking, whether it's about Dazzle or it's not. Oh my God, I see my little bar about subscribers because like I said, it says I need 40 on my little goal bar because that's automatically what filled. But when I was reading Twitch, it said that I needed 50. Not subscribers, followers. I can't have subscribers yet. To become an affiliate, and we're so close. I see that little purple bar at the very top. Ugh. I guess I can't complain too much. I've been streaming, I think, for less than a week, so I can't. I guess I can't complain. I don't know how long it takes people to get to where they're at, and that seems quick for what we're doing, but I don't know. And then we'll have to have some chatty sessions where I just talk at you guys and we talk about what creative project you want to see me dive into next. I would say we could dive into my pants project, but I've reinforced my pants for the winter. If you follow me on Instagram, also Everybody, follow me on Instagram. You've seen that my pants are prepared for winter, and I really can't add too much more to them without. I mean, I could add a handful of more aesthetic patches, but not too many. See, that's the wrong angle, and I've got to change it because corner life. Last time I had a really good camera angle for the corner where if you were watching it, you couldn't see the corner. Also, is it weird that my dad is watching my Twitch stream? I don't think it's weird. Ah! Ah! I just wanted to fix that angle and now I've ruined everything. Okay, okay. This is the angle. And we need it to be not that angle because it was wrong. We want it to be that angle. Nope, that was the opposite of what I wanted to do. Oh man. How about this? I'm gonna, and then hope, yeah, this should be fine. We can work with this. So, oh no, I was wrong. I was wrong. Abort. My shoulders hurt so bad. Handstands are very hard. Don't tell me about how Karen can color block her living room and feel like a fancier artist. I don't care. I just learned about this guy who does tape and it looks dope. Another thing that I like about this tape art style that I use is that like there's something contemporary about it. And another thing that people don't know, when they think of contemporary art, they think of just like modern abstractism. But in reality, contemporary art is more about the temporality of it. In traditional fashion, contemporary art is meant to be art that doesn't last forever, which is part of the reason why it's called contemporary, because it's only current for the time, but overall temporary in nature. And with this tape style of art, eventually, no matter how good of a job I do at sealing, it's going to peel, it's going to change, it's going to be different. It's going to come down slowly and piece by piece, not all at once, but like it's not a forever solution for my wall, which is why people say I should paint it. But if I painted it, then everything would be reverse of how I wanted it, like how I envisioned it. Like I really like this big, bold black and white style. That is my jam. And if I painted it, even if I painted it black, all of these white spots would be black and all the black spots would be white. And that's not how that's not how I made it. That's not how I wanted it in my brain. So eventually I might throw a coat of paint on it. But that's a future me problem. And we know how we feel about futurists. They're too passive. And that's how I feel about cubists. Well, we're all vortricists now. Reject the Victorian era. It never happened. It never happened. No, that's not right. But is it right enough? There's a tiny piece you can't see. It's okay. Tell him to call me.